Welcome back to another episode of Morning Coffee. I'm your host, Rick Alexander. You guys can interact with me or follow me at @RickAlexander_ or at the Morning Coffee Podcast on Instagram. Now, if you're getting a lot from this show, if it's changing your life or even changing the way that you look at your life, it would mean the world to me if you would head to iTunes and give us a 5-star review so that we can continue to climb the charts and get this information to more and more people. Over the last year and a half, I've focused my work on the story that we tell ourselves about our lives. Your entire life is a bit of a story that you're telling yourself. And if you could tell yourself a different story, you could probably change your life quite a bit. And so I did that work for the release of my newest book, which is coming out in early 2020. But getting excited for that release, I actually wanted to go through a lot of the information that I had learned, a lot of my notes, and synthesize it into maxims, which is what we're getting into today. I've got 21 maxims to maximize your life, and what these are is just things that seem to be true about the human experience, and if you could understand how they are true, you could understand how they could change your life. And so if you go to rickalexander.com, what you're going to find is if you click on articles, the maxim of the day is going to be posted, whatever the last maxim was, and it's also going to have journal entries and thought experiments in there so that you can figure out how to apply these things to your own lives. And so a bit of an interactive experience. So throughout the next year, through my speaking, through my book release, and through these maxims, I'm excited to see how this information can really change the world and change your world if you give it an opportunity to. Dostoevsky wrote a little bit about sort of the human drive and our ungratefulness and the things that push us. And he talks about utopia. And he predicts that even when we're sitting in utopia, we'll be eternally ungrateful for the things that we have. And it'll be so boring and predictable that against all common sense and rationality, people will start breaking things just to see something else happen. He goes to say, shower him with all earthly blessings, drown him in happiness completely over his head, so that only bubbles pop up on the surface of happiness, as in water. Give him such economic satisfaction that he no longer has anything left to do at all, except sleep, eat gingerbread, and worry about the non-cessation of world history. And it is here, just here, that he, this man, out of sheer ingratitude, out of sheer lampoonery, will do something nasty. He will even risk his gingerbread and wish on purpose for the most pernicious nonsense, the most non-economical meaninglessness, solely in order to mix into all this positive good sense his own pernicious fantastical element. Many of us have this picture in our heads that we're striving towards this happy ending, this utopia, but I don't know that we actually want it. And this is brought out by the movies that we watch, right? Like, there's no doubt because all of them have a happy ending, or most of them have a happy ending. And so when we're watching them and we're identifying ourselves with the main characters and the heroes in the story, we also identify ourselves with the fact that they arrive at the happy ending and then the movie ends. But it's actually really important that you understand that that isn't true. Humans are not meant for this static utopia. It actually ruins our character and our soul in some way. Many of you before have heard me say that there's nowhere to actually get in life. And while that's definitely true, I would say that even if there were, you wouldn't actually want to be there because as a human, you really don't function optimally in that environment, like at all. You actually need the optimal amount of uncertainty, which is far different, right? And so imagine if your success metric, if you considered what you needed to be successful, your happy ever after, let's say, landed you in a point with the optimal amount of uncertainty. That's actually what you would need. But most people don't think about that because we're conditioned to believe that there is a static utopia that we're all sort of driving toward. But we'd never let ourselves have it, first of all. I think that was one of the predominant realizations by Dostoevsky in his work, is that we would never let ourselves actually have any kind of utopia. But perhaps that's just because that's not what we're meant for. Like, that's not what optimal is for us. You need safety where you are, but beyond that, you need the freedom to roam and step into the unknown. You only need safety in order to ensure that you're alive, right? And then beyond that, it actually doesn't help anymore, right? It becomes stagnant. It becomes the walls that close us in ourselves. And so in order for humans to really feel like they're progressing in life, they need one foot in the campsite and they need the other in the wild. we all have this deep desire to evolve and to push ourselves and to push into the unknown and to figure out who we can become. But you need the optimal amount of uncertainty for that. You need the right amount of adversity that's going to allow you to mold who you can become. You know, I teach an entire model on this in the Clarity Academy because I think it's immensely important that you learn how to identify these things. So like sometimes you feel stuck in life, right? And so when you feel stuck, what's actually happening is you've created too much safety, perhaps. Like you don't have one foot in the wild anymore. You don't have one foot in the unknown. And that's not optimal for humans. We start to feel stagnant. Like all you have to do is get as safe as you possibly can and then see how good your life is. It actually doesn't provide anything in the sense of meaning. You know, but then on the other hand, this is the problem that I have, is I step too far into the unknown too often. And so I take on really big things. I find myself like outside of my element or underwater, so to speak. And I have to like really force myself to grow into the person that I need to become in order to succeed in things. But that's a really uncomfortable way to go too, because the optimal way of being is the optimal amount of uncertainty, which means you have one foot in safety and one foot in the wild. And I talk about this in terms of flow state quite often, because a flow state occurs when one foot is planted in what you understand, and then you're also simultaneously exploring what you don't know. And that's the optimal state for humans to exist in. And so the reason I'm telling you all this today is because we tend to have a lot of ideas about where we're going with our lives. And the picture that we hold for ourselves is something like some happily ever after. And the problem is that as you start to engage with a happily ever after, you realize it's not that happy. You realize it's not actually where you want to be. Where you want to be is striving. That's where the quality of your life is going to be improved. And so when you set up your goals, you want to make sure they don't get you to a place that feels a lot like a prison, because I think that's what we tend to do. If we don't analyze the metrics that we're after and what we consider to be success, then we end up going after what the world has given us. And oftentimes that's just not our own, right? We've learned that throughout these maxims. Like, you're set up to succeed in a world that you don't really live in. And so in a lot of ways, you've got to figure out what it is that you want. What are the rules? What does success look like for you? And then understand that if that conceptualization of success leaves you in a place where there's no more uncertainty and there's no more striving, it's actually not going to be that good for you. It's actually not going to turn out to be the way that you want to live your life optimally, or ultimately, we could say. You know, it's easy to get bummed out when we strive for something and it doesn't work out, because we think that it working out was what we were after. But what we were actually after is who we became in the striving. And if you take that lens, it turns out that you were actually probably successful in what you were striving after. It's just that you thought utopia is what you wanted, when the reality is that what you actually need is the optimal amount of uncertainty. You need something to present itself that you can grapple with and contend with, that's going to force you to become more than who you are. And so don't let your picture of what could be, or what you thought the idea or the point was, to rule out all that you've actually gained from that experience. This is your life and it's happening now. And it's easy to think that everything that gets in our way is actually in our way, on our way to some static utopia. But the things that get in our way are the things that form our lives, forms the quality of our lives. And so with that perspective, you realize that the way that you're being is far more important than what you are doing. And perhaps the character that you need to summon in order to become someone better is what you're actually being called to. It's important to understand the distinction, because if not, you're going to be going for a happily ever after that's not going to leave you that happy once you finally get it. So ensure that you analyze your goals and the things that you're after, and make sure that you're not missing something along the way, because it might be that life is handing you all of these perfect scenarios that you need in order to become someone better, but you keep seeing nothing but things that aren't working out. And so you need a perspective shift in order to realize that you're actually exactly where you need to be. You're actually who you need to be. It's your job to just continue to execute. Anyway, I love you. Hope you have an amazing day. We'll talk later on Morning Coffee.